So in this video, we're gonna talk about setting up the floor on the gas kiln, some of the principles surrounding that, and just like the early stages of loading. And this is applicable to our updraft kilns and our downdraft kilns, and a lot of it is also transferable to soda kilns and wood kilns as well. So with our kilns, when we open, there's 4 points here that latch the door. This door needs to be snug. It does not need to be tight because as we fire, things expand. And during our firing, which I'll cover more in detail in another video, it's important to just kind of double check these throughout the firing and make sure nothing's loosened up. So once we get all 4 of these latches, this should swing out pretty freely. And then we can see in the kiln that we've got 2 of these 12 by 24 foot shelves. And camera, if you want to come around, get a good shot in there. A couple of things to note is we've got sufficient airspace underneath. We don't have these directly on the floor. This makes it so that there's not a cold spot. If you're trying to squeeze in a giant piece and you have to put these on the floor, that's acceptable. There's also, if you'll note, there's about an inch gap in between the shelves and then another inch gap back here before we get to the flue. And those are all important for air circulation, which helps us get an even amount of reduction and heat throughout the kiln. Okay. So when it comes to stacking kiln shelves, whether we're in electric kilns or certainly in gas kilns, wood kilns, soda kilns, etc., there's basically 2 categories. We can 3-post or we can 4-post. And each has its own sort of advantages and disadvantages. And when I'm talking about 4-posting, that means that we're putting, a post on 4 corners of a sort of rectangular or square shelf. And in doing that, I get a pretty large open space here. One of the disadvantages is that through repetitive firing, this will start to slump this way. And eventually we have to grind off all of the kiln wash, which is on top of the shelf, and then we can flip it over and then that sag will slowly start to work out. One of the other disadvantages to a 4-post is that you have to use wadding. I don't know if you can hear that, camera. You have to use wadding to make it level. It doesn't auto level. It wobbles like that. And we have wadding, so we can do that. Okay. With 3-post stacking, that essentially means that we have 1 post in the center of one of the long runs, and then 2 posts on the outside. And there's advantages to this in that, if we mirror this on our other shelf, we have a large center area that we could put large sculptures or platters in, and our shelves are supported. The other advantage to 3-posting is that it's self-leveling, like a tripod, so we don't need to use any wadding. The other advantage as well is that when this begins to warp, this would sag here, and we don't have to do anything but spin this around and fire it this direction to help counteract that warping. So ultimately, in 3-posting, we get a little less warping. I think we get an equal amount of stacking advantages. And it's pretty much overall what we do in this studio. So most commonly, this is going to be how we load all of our kilns in a 3-post fashion. And the most important principle when it comes to stacking any kiln, whether that be 4-post or 3-post or some other crazy thing you might come up with, is that they are supported underneath. So as you can see here, we have a shelf shard, which provides us with a little bit of lift for the airflow that I was mentioning before. But when we stack, it's critical that we stack in this fashion. Everything always has to build on top of each other. So when we set the floor, we have to follow that same pattern all the way up. You can think about it as a sort of structural engineering component. So it's really important to note what the layout pattern is underneath this bottom shelf. So, we may say we do 3 posts in our studio, and you could come to the kiln and start stacking like this, and that would create a real problem because the weight of everything on top of this is completely unsupported here. And that can cause the shelf to break, it can cause all the work to collapse, and not only harm the work, but also harm you. And then lastly, as a quick note for our techs, grad students, administrators, etc., best practices when it comes to setting the floor of any kiln is to anticipate any any stacking pattern. So in a perfect world, we should actually have shelf shards on 6 points on these bottom shelves. 1, 2, here in the center, 2 on either side over here, and then that will accommodate a consistent stacking pattern of 4 post or 3 post where there's a large center, or 3 post where we have posts in the middle. And we're gonna try to get all of our kilns set to that, but those of you students who are watching, do not count on it. Always make sure yourself take a look at what the stacking is underneath.